Hey Catherine, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Good to see you. How's your day been so far?
It's been good. It's morning over here, so I actually had an early start, but I'm enjoying it. It's just getting started. So.
Excellent. Good to hear it. Yeah, so let the viewers know who you are, what you do, and why you do it, Catherine.
My name is Katherine Kimball, and I am the CEO and founder of Katavita Coaching, and I am a women's coach. And so I coach women with their relationships, whether they're getting ready for relationships, recovering from relationships, or want to learn how to connect in a healthier way with the relationships they currently have. So I do a lot of somatic work, expressive writing exercises, and things like that, guided visualizations to help women build their confidence, self love, self worth, and help them set boundaries and things like that.
Excellent.
So, why I do it? Because I'm passionate about helping people. I've gone on my own healing journey, and so I want to give back and help women get to where I've gotten. So,
Excellent, excellent. So when you look back and you look at the moment when you decided that this is what you want to get into, you mentioned going on your own healing journey. Can you walk us through the process of like that journey and what it looked like for you?
yeah, so I have a background with a lot of trauma. I was in several abusive relationships. I growing up was in a very emotionally toxic and verbally abusive environment. So, a lot of that got internalized from a very young age for me. And so I repeated those patterns in my romantic relationships. Um, and it was a long journey recovering from trauma, recovering from abuse, and it took years of therapy and searching through good and bad therapists and things like that. And um, especially after, I guess in 2019, I was I had a trauma incident. I was, let's see, for to avoid any buzzwords, I was had sex without my consent. And my experience recovering from that was just that there was so little support for women from people who actually got it, who had been through it. There's just a lot of people who didn't understand what it was like. Um, and even going to trauma therapists, I went to four different trauma therapists before I could find one that actually helped me. Um, but I just felt like what I really needed, while the therapy is great, what was really missing from that journey was just emotional support from someone who understood what it was like. And so um, that is kind of what was in the back of my head when I started getting into this, is just um, helping women who have been in similar situations know that they're not alone, know that they're not judged, giving them a safe space. And then also, I also was an English teacher before this, and just watching so many of my students who just were so incredibly self-conscious and had such low self-esteem. And the public education system in the states is not really set up to give a lot of emotional support. A lot of our systems aren't set up to give much emotional support in businesses and workplaces and things like that, um, and especially for women. And so, um, just wanting to create something where I can help in a way that I feel like is largely needed in our society. So
Right,
that's
right, right.
that's my motivation behind it, I guess.
Right, right. Yeah, I do want to talk more about the situation of intimacy without your consent. But before we talk about that, like you did mention, like growing up, there was a lot of abuse, a lot of verbal abuse, and you had a therapy through that. Like, what do you feel like what was the thing that really helped you in the therapy? What was said, or what was the thing that really got you through that mentality of like the trauma that you went through and got you to the next step?
Yeah, I think the most important thing like the that I learned was through lots of things, not just therapy, but reading books and journaling and reflection and but was that my value is not based on how I can help others or serve others. So my value to others is not the same thing as my inherent value. Because I was sort of taught this belief of like my only value is what I can be to others. If I'm useful to someone else, then I'm valuable. If I'm not useful to someone else or it doesn't seem like I'm useful to them or I'm not helping them in some way, then I have no value. And really unlearning that lesson, um, and learning like I have inherent value and my needs are just as valuable as everybody else's needs. Um, and if my needs don't necessarily align with other people, that's okay. And it doesn't make me a bad person and it doesn't make me selfish or ungrateful. It's just people are people and we all have our needs. And if you're familiar with that quote, Mother Teresa says, like, if everybody cleaned their own doorstep, then the whole world would be clean. I think that was the biggest thing is understanding I'm inherently valuable and I don't have to be proving it to everybody. And that I see that in hindsight. I don't know that I necessarily had that like light bulb moment. But I do think that starting to realize those things is what made my biggest breakthrough to like making permanent change of my behaviors and the sort of relationships I attracted.
Right, right, right. Now, you did mention that even though you went through therapy, those habits did carry on into your relationship of like from the previous trauma that you went through. So, would you say that you were a people pleaser in those relationships, or what was the main issue that you were facing in those relationships going forward?
Yeah, so I was very codependent. And I did date um some I had different relationships, but some narcissistic kind of manipulative people, and then others that were just emotionally unavailable. Um, but I think what it was just blaming myself or thinking that if I just did more, right, that I would convince this person that I was worth treating me correctly rather than identifying like okay, these are red flags behaviors, this person has issues that maybe they're not ready to deal with yet, or maybe we just have different needs in our relationships, right, we're just not aligned in what we both want. And so rather than seeing that and understanding it and moving on, I would stay and try to make something work that wasn't working. And just if it when it didn't work out, um, either when they treated me badly or they, blamed me for stuff, I would just sort of try harder and give more rather than, and sort of almost like a self betrayal of my own needs for thairs.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So, do you feel like you had a need for validation in those relationships that you weren't getting previously?
Yeah, so like I said, like I think that was the validation I was looking for was that belief of like my value is based on how valuable I can be to other people. And so if they're treating me like I'm not valuable, then I need to convince them, right?
Mm.
Um and So when a lot of times the way that people treat you has nothing to do with you and actually has to do with how they feel about themselves, right? Or their own issues and their own problems from their past. So I think, yeah, I was looking for that validation of, if I just try harder, you're going to stop treating me badly. Or if I just love you more, if I just do more for you, if I just like, I'm somehow going to change your behavior and make you feel, if I make you feel loved, then you're going to make me feel loved. And unfortunately, people don't always work that way. If someone is a manipulator, if someone is a chronic liar, if someone is self-sabotaging because they don't have their own self-confidence or they don't believe they deserve your relationship, that's out of your control, right? You can't make someone emotionally available and ready to face things. And you can't make a lot of times you can't make an abuser not abusive. Um, I mean, it takes a lot of serious therapy and work on themselves. And you're not going to do that by putting up with their bad behavior or tolerating their bad behavior or justifying their bad behavior or anything like that.
Right, right, right. So when you got to that point where you realized that this need for validation wasn't serving you, like how did you navigate that relationship to get out of it and to get yourself into a better position?
Yeah, well, I think after every end of a relationship, working on your own self-love and self-worth, even if it wasn't an abusive relationship, because not all my relationships were abusive per se, but you still just the nature of a breakup is it I mean, it's called a break up for a reason, right? You feel hurt, you feel like you've been knocked down. Even if you're the person breaking up with them, it's still hard. But I think focusing on building self confidence and refinding your own identity. Like for me personally, was just like, well, I need to find my identity of who I want to be without this person. And not only without them, but without anyone, right? So when I'm not in a relationship, who do I want to be? And getting really familiar with that and figuring that out makes it a lot easier to then go into and attract healthier relationships because once you really know what you want and what aligns with you, it's going to be much easier to when the wrong type of person shows up, identify that they're the wrong person and pass because you have that confidence of like, I know who I am, I know what I want, and I'm not going to compromise that for someone. But it does take a certain level of self confidence and self love, um, and so I think focusing on those things is what got me to a place where eventually I could attract a very healthy relationship, and a very safe relationship, um, which I'm still in now.
Right,
So.
excellent, excellent. So, before you did get into this healthy and safe relationship, there was the situation of intimacy without consent. So, what was the situation at that time, and like, what was going on in your life in that period?
Yeah. So I actually was teaching abroad, so I wasn't living in the States at the time. And it was a friend of mine, actually. It was someone that I had been friends with. I had met when I moved out of the country. One of the first friends that I had made when I moved there. And so he was someone that I thought I could trust. And I had, because of how, like, the way the city was set up, he lived about an hour and 20 minutes like subway ride away. And so oftentimes, like, if we were hanging out in groups or on our own, it would just be easier since public transportation closed down at like 11. It would just be easier to spend the night there. And so I had done that a couple of times, and not like just platonically. And but one night, it was for his birthday. We had cooked dinner and we're drinking, and he kind of had made a pass at me and like confessed that like he wanted to date me. And I just said, I don't. And I don't have the same feelings. Like, I don't think of you like that. Um, but he just kind of throughout the night, we talk about other stuff, and then it would always keep kind of circling back to that. And I'd continue to say, like, no, again, I'm not interested, and he just kind of kept pushing it. I'm pushing it. And so it got to the point where I felt very uncomfortable, but it was really late. Transportation was closed down. Like, it was an hour and 20 minutes back, like, to my place, and I didn't even know if they'd have a cab available at 3 a.m. um, and so like we were falling asleep, and that's like when he sort of, attacked me. And um and so afterwards, you know we had worked in the same company, and so I would continue to see him, so there was kind of this feeling of I can't really get away. um and there was a lot of shame, and um there was a lot of, I didn't necessarily um feel comfortable with the idea of dating anyone else, because I to up to that point, right, everyone I had ever slept with, I'd always gotten tested before getting a new partner. Um, and I just was afraid. There was just a lot of guilt and shame, and I didn't feel comfortable going to a doctor. And I, I didn't even want to really think about it. It was a long time before I could even like admit to myself what had happened. um, and I kept running into him. And so it was like I felt like I couldn't get away from him. And so he kind of pressured me into continuing a relationship with him. Um, and I agreed to it. And for a long time, I felt like, I mean, I knew I didn't have feelings for him like that, but a part of me just agreed to it. And after things ended, because of the pandemic, I lost my work visa. Um, I felt so much shame for that. I was so embarrassed, disappointed with myself that I had agreed to continue a relationship with this person who had done something like that to me. And it took me 5 therapists before I found a trauma therapist who had worked at the women's, or not women's, but she had worked in the Houston hospital in the sexual assault ward, and she was the therapist on call for any women that came in with any sort of situation like that. And she had done that for years. And what she told me was that is actually the number one most common response to that sort of trauma, is agreeing to continue a relationship with them. Um, and she said the other most common response is that the person who went through, the victim of that trauma, then goes on to have encounters with lots of different men, like that they don't really have a connection with. A lot of them in a very short period of time. And what it is it's actually a trauma response, to trying to sort of reenact the situation in a way that you have control. And it's not necessarily a very healthy trauma response, but it is the most common trauma response. And for me, like when she told me that, it was like this weight was just lifted off of me. And I mean, this was probably like almost 3 years after it had happened. Um, and and but I was just like, wow, how I went to sessions with all these trauma therapists, and I did all this research, and even before that I was very informed about mental health and wellness and trauma, and because of just the past that I'd already had and the recovery steps I'd already taken. So the fact that I just completely didn't know this was like just incredible to me. And I just felt like it was because nobody's talking about it, and there weren't like any stories out there of women who had had something like this happen. And so I think just that wanting to get a story out there, because I think about myself when I was going through all of that and how long I held on to that shame and that embarrassment, and just knowing like if someone can hear my story and know like, oh, I'm not alone, or I don't have to feel ashamed, or the way that I responded wasn't bad. The way I responded was my brain trying to help me survive. Um, and so I think that is something that is obviously very difficult for people to talk about. It's a very sensitive subject. Even like the words we use around it, we sort of have to censor it so you don't like get buried in an algorithm, right? Or just like banned or removed from a site. Um, but it is sort of like you get thrown into this world where it's like something X-rated has happened to you. It wasn't something you asked for. It's not like you were going out and looking for that. You didn't ask for this to happen. But now all of a sudden, like there's only certain situations where you're allowed to talk about it or bring it up, and people have very negative responses if you do bring it up. So it's like, how do you even start talking about something like that? Um, when it's such a serious subject, but then it's such a widespread subject. Because among my friends, and among women I've talked to, and even men that I've dated, multiple people have made the comment of like, there's so many like there's so many people I know who have had an experience like this, right? Where it seems to be such a common thing. But then when you look in the media or you look online, you don't really see these stories getting told anywhere. And it might be something that it's sort of like, it happened to a friend, or they're dealing with it, but you don't really talk to them about it. And it might be something they tell you in confidence, but then it's not really something that people ever go into detail about. Um, and so it's like, how do you create a space where people feel comfortable and safe to talk about things that are very uncomfortable to talk about? Um, and how do you tell a story that provides hope for other survivors that isn't also like too graphic or traumatizing for people? So it's a difficult thing to navigate. Um, but I think just having conversations like these are good ways to start those conversations and get those stories out there so that women know, like, I'm not alone.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It definitely takes time and a lot of emotional healing before you can get to the point where you feel comfortable enough to express yourself, which I see that you've reached that stage where you've come to the point of being able to express yourself. But when you look back at the incident, after the incident happened, and you said that you were still working in the same place and bumping into each other, and you then decided to get back into a relationship or to get into a relationship in that situation, what was the emotions that you were going through at the time that made you feel like, let's get into a relationship? I know that you explained that it was a trauma response, but the emotion side of what you were feeling, what was those emotions like from your side?
Yeah. So honestly, what I think it was shame. Is I had a lot of shame around the incident. I was very, very embarrassed. And I felt used and I felt dirty about it and I felt disgust, you know, um and I felt all of those things. And the idea of dating somebody else, if that makes sense, was like that fear of like, what if they find out, you know, that I've been, that I'm used or that I'm broken or that I'm dirt. Like it was very shame. Like it was like this wound that I didn't want anybody to know about. And so just the idea of entering into a relationship with a different person, a healthy person, was like, I felt so much shame. I didn't feel worthy of that because I felt like I had been defiled in some way. And so but with him, it was like he already knew the dirty little secret because he was the one who did it. And so I think it was just like this just overwhelming shame of having to admit to somebody else what had happened. And knowing that I wouldn't have to admit that to him because he knew, because he's the one who did it, you know. And I think that was it, was that I just couldn't bear the idea of having to admit or tell somebody else about it.
Right, right, right. Yeah, so I mean that's a very deep situation, like emotionally, to feel that the shame that you're feeling, you literally need to go deeper into it to get out of it, so to speak, by getting back into a relationship with the situation that caused the shame in the first place. In a sense, trying to fix something that is broken in that way. But when you now look at like when you got into a healthy relationship, how did you manage to approach that situation, and how was that transition like from the situation you was in before to this new healthy relationship?
Yeah. So well, after that, after that whole situation, I didn't date for a very long time. And then when I did date, when I finally did get back into dating, um I made sure I was in a place where I was comfortable with setting boundaries. And I waited a very long time in relationships before I was willing to like take it to that level. Um, because I was afraid of having some sort of flashback or trauma response. And I wanted to make sure that before I let myself be in that situation, that I felt safe with the person I was with. Um, and so I think when I finally did get into the relationship I'm in now, it helped that I had done some dating before that. Um, because I think when you get back into it, you kind of, it's a test of where you're at, as far as being able to trust people, how you respond to people, what you feel comfortable with. Um, and so I think it was just a matter of understanding, like, I don't owe that story to anyone. So if I'm not ready to tell them, I don't have to tell them. And I can wait and tell them when I feel comfortable. And I can set boundaries with people without having to tell them why I'm setting those boundaries, right? So when I'm dating someone, if I'm not in a position where I trust them yet or feel safe enough with them yet, I can tell them, hey, I'm not okay having sex yet, or I want to take things slow, or I want to wait, however long, whatever, or a big thing for me was I never wanted a guy to come over to my place because I didn't want them to know, like, where I lived, right? So I think it's just like a matter of figuring out what those boundaries are for you, what you're comfortable with, and then, waiting and it helps if you tell people that you can trust to have a reasonable response to. So if it's not a safe person, or you're not exactly sure how they're going to respond to it, then I would say, you don't owe anyone an explanation. Um, and so I think with the relationship I'm in now, we were probably a month or two into dating before I told him. Um, but I mean, I waited until I felt like, I feel safe with this person. I feel like I can trust them. Um, I feel like they have shown that they respect my boundaries, that they're kind and understanding and, non-judgmental, that I feel safe telling them this. Um, and I was, fortunately, I was right. And it was not something that I was judged for. The way that, my trauma brain back then had worried that people would judge me, that was not the case at all. um and I think that sometimes, in your head, you tell yourself these stories, right? And then the reality is not always as bad, right? You think everyone's going to judge you, you think everyone's going to be super critical of you. Whereas largely in my experience, I won't say that, you don't still have people who victim blame and say really insensitive things and stuff like that, but um I largely, most people that I've opened up to it about were very compassionate and very supportive and very non-judgmental. Um, so I think that just, mm, picking safe people, before you share with them.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Trust is definitely something that happens naturally that you can't force yourself to feel for someone. So once you did start to feel trust for your partner, is when you obviously were able to open up to them again. Do you feel like there was any restrictions, even though after you trusted your partner, was there still any restrictions like in the intimacy side of things?
um and the intimacy side of things, I no, I don't think there was, because we took things very slow, and that was one of the reasons. Um, and so by the time we did get to that point, I knew he was someone I felt safe with. Um, and so I don't think there were any restrictions in that sense. There were a couple of times where maybe I got triggered. Um, and like, but it was, he was able to know, like, hey, like, what's up? Like, are you ready to talk about it? Is it okay if are you okay with me hugging you? Like that kind of thing. Like very considerate of, like, I was clearly in distress. He came to check on me. He was very delicate with how he handled the situation about asking, like, is it okay if I hug you? Is it okay if I put my arms around you? And me saying yes. And then, like, asking, like, do you want to talk about it? And me being like, no, I'm not ready to talk about it yet. And him giving me that space to just sort of be in the emotions and processing them. Um, and then giving me time to, like, talk about it later. And so luckily, the two of us, we call ourselves, he calls us certified yappers because we talk all the time. So luckily, that's a good strong point in our relationship, is we talk about a lot of different things. So there was always that open communication of, yeah, like, hey, I need this right now, or I need that, or I'm not ready to talk type of thing.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Catherine, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for everything that you've shared. Where could people find you, find out more about you, and find out more about what you do?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, Katavita Coaching. Katavita is KATAVITA dot coaching.com. And I have Instagram with the same handle. And then my personal Instagram, which is also public, is just Katherine V. Kimball. So
Excellent,
those would be the best ways to get in touch with me.
excellent. And for the viewers, all the links to our socials will be in the description, so you can get in touch with Catherine and find out more about what she does. Once again, Catherine, thank you so much for coming on. Any final words before we wrap up?
No, just thank you for having this platform and creating a space for me to tell my story. I really appreciated it, and I really appreciate what you're doing. And I wish you all the best luck and success.
You're very welcome, Catherine, and I appreciate you too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.